What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Big Six Podcast and an emergency podcast because the second time in his career, Josh McDaniels was fired in his second season, in the middle of his second season with an AFC West team. And this time it wasn't on a random Tuesday, Ryan Wilson. I think that's when it happened. You and I were maybe working for CBS. Maybe still working for Fan House when Josh McDaniels was fired by the Broncos way back in the day. But this actually happened on a Wednesday morning because it was at 1 a.m. when most of the world was sleeping. Will Brinson here with Ryan Wilson and John Breech breaking down the Josh McDaniels firing. Look, I'll be honest, pretty shocked here because we had been talking about Josh McDaniels as someone who, relative to what the expectations were and performance-wise and personnel move-wise, you could make the case that could probably be fired. I was under the impression that Mark Davis was going to be really patient with this one because of how poorly things ended with John Gruden. But Ryan Wilson, Josh McDaniels is out in Las Vegas.
I was asleep. Turns out Breech was not asleep. In fact, Breech was staring at his wall. His phone went off. In his defense, it was noon. It was midnight.
Did you write the story?
Central Time. Hold on. It was midnight Central Time. Breech laying there. His phone goes off, and he says, I wonder if someone's going to write this. I would have turned over and gone to sleep. 8 minutes later, Breech is typing in his bed. His wife's probably like, Breech, what are you doing? She calls him Breech. He wrote the story because that's what Breech does. I was not shocked. And back in 2010, so 2009, Josh McDaniels gets hired to go to Denver. 6-0, finished 8-8 that season. The next year they go 3-9. He's out after week 13. Doesn't even make it to week 13 this year. They are 3-5. They look like an 0-8 team, and it doesn't make sense. And even Mark Davis can figure this out. And I understand what you're saying, Brinson, in that maybe he would be patient because of all the tumult in recent Raiders history. But terrible football is terrible football, and when it's on display for the entire world to see on these nationally televised games, I think at some point you have to turn the page. You see Davante Adams' frustration on the field, frustration afterwards in the conversations with the media. It is just not working. Move on from Derek Carr, you move on from Darren Waller, and this team is immeasurably worse. And Breech, he's the offensive mastermind, and this is some Mickey Mouse, Joe Judge stuff we were seeing in Las Vegas.
Well, this is the thing is that, so when this all happened, I wasn't necessarily shocked that Josh McDaniels got fired just because, as Brinson said, I feel like he's been on the hot seat all season. He's made some very precarious decisions. The offenses looked absolutely horrible, but I was stunned at the timing of this. I mean, you are dumping your general manager and your head coach 8 hours after NFL trade deadline. Who is answering the phone calls in Las Vegas on Tuesday afternoon? Because apparently Davis had this planned out that he was getting rid of these guys. So that's why we didn't see Josh Jacobs traded or Davante Adams traded, because Mark Davis was running the show there, getting ready to dump these guys. And Halloween night, I mean, this just seems like a typical crazy Raiders move. As Brinson said, 1 a.m. Eastern, but actually 10 p.m. Pacific time. So deep into Halloween, Mark Davis decides to fire everyone. So you can't fault him for this. I mean, this is a team that has not scored 20 points in a single game this season. The first team since 2009 to play the first 8 games of their season without scoring 20 points. And if the offense is struggling, that is 100% on Josh McDaniels. So yeah, this was, the news wasn't stunning, but the timing of the news to me was stunning. That's where I fall on this.
GM Dave Ziegler also fired. They came together as a package deal from the Patriots 2 off seasons ago, and Mick Lombardi, the offensive coordinator, was relieved of his duties as well. Antonio Pierce will be the interim.
That's literally in the last 20 minutes too.
The Mick Lombardi thing. Yeah. I mean, sort of like if you're going to fire McDaniels, you got to fire Lombardi's kid, right? He's not even related to Vince Lombardi. It's like Mike Lombardi's kid. Like, do you think that might be why they fired him? He found out, he's like, whoa. You're not related to Vince Lombardi? Obviously kidding there. Look, I mean, I think that you can also, I mean, I'm not saying that they shouldn't. I'm not saying they should have kept him. I'm just saying that there are plenty of coaches who have started slow in years past who were given a chance. Like Dan Campbell had a 4-19 record with the Lions.
Yeah,
You know?
but I mean, that's literally comparing apples to oranges. Josh McDaniels had a track record. He went back and reinvented himself. And look, if you want a comparison, here's the comparison. And it's not even that is it's almost apples to apple cider. Mike McCarthy and Josh McDaniels. Mike McCarthy got run out of town in Green Bay. He was successful in Green Bay, by the way. Went and refound himself. Then he struggled in Dallas.
I don't think
Hold
that's
on.
a comparison.
Hold on.
He won a Super
Hold
Bowl in
on.
his first 5 years.
Hold on. He's a coach who was run out on a rail because the quarterback didn't want him. And so he left in disgrace, quotation marks. He was successful, but he took a year to find himself. He struggled in Dallas early on, not terribly to the point that we see Josh McDaniels doing it, but to the point where people are wondering, okay, is Jerry Jones going to replace him with whatever the flavor of the month is? And it turns out he's found himself. He's sort of on the path that he wants to be on. That team is really good. Comparing that to Dan Campbell, who was a first-year coach, I think that's the difference I'm making. Josh McDaniels was terrible, except for the first 6 games at Denver. Then the wheels fell off, and then he spent quite a time back in, he was at Rams for a minute, and then he went over to New England and reunited with Belichick, and then sort of.
I think it's a terrible comparison. I mean, Mike McCarthy won 13 games in his second year.
Okay, well, I don't think the Dan Campbell's comparison is a good one either. That's why I was trying to offer something of a coach who had previously been somewhere and then left.
Okay, so you guys don't quarrel. Josh McDaniels is the first coach in NFL history to be fired twice in the middle of a season. There is no comparison. He is literally blazing his own path of futility here.
And I believe the first coach to be fired in the middle of before the end of his second season by 2 different teams. Yes, I mean, like it's like there's
exactly what you said.
What's up?
That's what Breech just said.
No, he said the first coach to be fired in the middle of a season twice. The first coach also to be fired before the end of his second season twice. Like that's never happened before. That's 2 different things. You see that, right?
Yes.
Are you sure he's the first coach to be fired in the middle of the season twice?
A non-interim, just a regular head coach.
Okay. Kyle Shanahan, this is from Bill Barnwell's column on this. John Gruden, 11-21 in his second stint with the Raiders, didn't get fired. Kyle Shanahan, 10-22 across his first 2 seasons with the 49ers, didn't get fired. Dan Campbell, 4-19-1, didn't get fired. I think, and I understand it's Josh McDaniels' second stint. I just think it's it takes. I think it's more about the mistakes that he made in terms of, like, I mean, the Raiders thinking that they might be good and they trade a bunch of first round picks to go get Devontae Adams. You signed Chandler Jones. That was a flaming disaster. And I sort of wonder if, like, Mark Davis's success with the Las Vegas Aces, who won back-to-back WNBA titles, and they just sort of, you're maybe that's apples and oranges, but you're comparing a WNBA front office that you think is being run successfully and a coaching staff that's doing a good job to what you can see as a bleep show over in with your football team. And Jimmy Garoppolo has been terrible this year. He's been banged up. Derek Carr had been great for New Orleans or anything, but it was an unnecessary, like it wasn't the parallel sort of potential pseudo upgrade that I think Josh McDaniels thought he was going to get. And you get embarrassed by the Lions on national TV on Monday night. Doesn't help matters. I don't know that this makes the Raiders meaningfully better for the rest of the year. I mean, you can do what you want. You own the team, but I don't. I think firing a coach. I think everybody's way too quick to fire coaches. And I think that especially you two on this podcast, every Sunday night when, like, there's a coach who's struggling, it's like, so I just want to see you just fire him, just start over, fire him, just start over. Like, Ryan, like, you're the biggest criminal at all when it comes to, like, you're like, let's just fire this guy and start over. And, like, I understand if it's not working, if the coach is the right guy, you should move on. But it's like, I mean, halfway through your second season, you don't even know if you're a good coach or not, really.
Breech, I'm going to read you some numbers from True Media, and you tell me if this is a coach that you want around. Yards per game, 31st. Yards per play, 27th. And you're an offensive-minded, quote-unquote, genius, by the way. Rushing yards per game, 32nd. There are only 32 teams in the league, by the way. Interceptions per attempt. You're first in terms of the number of interceptions you're throwing per attempt.
Hey, woohoo, you ranked first in something.
First downs per game, you're 24th. Third down conversion percentage, you're 30th. Red zone efficiency, you're 25th. So I understand being patient with coaches. And I know, Brinson, you're being facetious in terms of fire everybody. But at some point, you got to be like, look, man, this
you guys wanted
working.
to fire Kyle Shanahan. I mean,
this ain't working, and we got to figure out a plan that doesn't involve you being a part of it. So if there's an argument to be made for keeping Josh McDaniels, I would love to hear it because I haven't heard it yet.
Look, if you're the Raiders, and I lean to the side that I don't think that midseason firings are a great idea, because I'm not sure that they accomplish anything. Although with the Raiders, maybe Davis was like, the John Gruden thing happened. Rich Bisaccia took us to the playoffs, so maybe I can harness some of that magic again. But when you look at kind of this season as a whole, you read how bad the numbers were. Let's not forget that when the Raiders were playing against the Chargers back in week 4, that Mark Davis literally had fans yelling in his face to fire Josh McDaniels. This is week 4. And Mark Davis went full Pete Prisco, and he was like, learn the game, smarten up. It's hashtag smarten up. Raiders fans started using that on Twitter facetiously because of Mark Davis saying, smarten up, I'm not firing my coach. And the thing is, after that happened, the Raiders went off and ran 2 straight. They beat the Packers and Patriots. They moved to 3-3, and it really felt like McDaniels had gotten himself off the hot seat. And I think he dug himself another hole when they lost to the Bears, who had a rookie quarterback out of a Division II college who was making his first career start. And I think that is the kind, and they lost 30-12. It wasn't close. And I think those are the losses that kind of pile up when Mark Davis is sitting in his office saying to himself, man, we lost to a Division II quarterback making his first career start. We lost to Jeff Saturday, who literally was coaching high school football the week before. We lost to the Rams, who started Baker Mayfield last December when he had just been signed to the team 5 days before the game.
Or he was traded, or was he released and then signed? Yeah, that's right.
He'd only been on the roster for 5 days.
Yeah.
And so you're just thinking, how do we keep losing these are embarrassing losses? And so I think he just felt that, hey, we got to do something. It's weird that you do it on a short week after a Monday game. And then there's also the argument to say, hey, look, you have 2 winnable games coming up against the Giants and Jets, both in Las Vegas. And if you win those, you're 5-5. So maybe you give McDaniels that shot, but you have to, he had a 6-year contract. So you have to, Davis was clearly just way past irate to pull the trigger at this point.
So the Raiders have been to the playoffs twice since they lost the Super Bowl to John Gruden and the Bucs. And I'm going to go back and just read the records for that team since Dennis Allen took over from Hugh Jackson's single year, when Hugh Jackson was remember when Hugh Jackson was the GM and the head coach, and he traded for Carson Palmer, traded 2 firsts for Carson Palmer, despite because Mark Davis died. Dennis Allen coached for 2 years, 4 wins. Tony Sperano took over halfway. They won 3 combined. Jack Del Rio hired the next year, 7 wins, 12 wins in that crazy season where they went 12-4. Not that anybody could have predicted that before the season, that exactly 12-4. No one could have predicted that, I'm sure, at like a CBS company family dinner. Del Rio wins 6 games, gets fired for Gruden like at the podium. Gruden wins 4, 7, 8. And then Gruden has to resign midseason for inappropriate conduct. Rich Bisaccia takes over. They win 10 games combined and lose the wild card. They had a negative 65-point differential that year. Like, they were the biggest luck box in football in 2021. Make the playoffs, lose the wild card to the Bengals after mounting a crazy comeback, and then they go 6-11 with McDaniels last year, and they're 3-5 this year. It's like, I guess my other thing here is, yeah, McDaniels has been bad, but this isn't that far outside of the norm for Raiders football. Like, the whole issue really to me is not that they are like extremely poorly coached, and they were, or that they were putting like together a bad roster, and they did. It's that, like, what I mean, and maybe Mark Davis is smart to just pull the trigger now and just rip the Band-Aid and move on. But I mean, would you be interested in the Raiders job?
Me personally, no. I would not want that job.
Yeah, like, would you leave your job podcasting with me and Breech?
No, for no amount of money. I did say during the course of that beatdown on Sunday night Monday night against the Lions, Jimmy Garoppolo makes $25 million a year. Midway through the third quarter, I had this thought that I said out loud. He does not look like he wants to be out there taking the beating that he's taking. And the response was, well, he makes $25 million a year. I said, I think he is at the point where no amount of money is worth what he has to endure on a weekly basis with just the lack of protection and just the poor football. And he would probably rather be anywhere else in Vegas other than playing in that football game. And I think that's sort of the overarching point. Go watch Devontae Adams give a press conference. You tell me if he looks like he's having fun. So I'm sure that Mark Davis weighed all that stuff, and that helped him decide to come to the ultimate conclusion after a few weeks of fans yelling in his face. But I don't know that this job is necessarily. And Breech, you seem to have a good memory about this. Are there guys who turned down interviewing for this job in previous 5, 6, 7 years that because of that?
Well, both times with the Raiders, you had Mark Davis, who was just zeroed in on the person he was going to hire, John Gruden first, and then Josh McDaniels. And so I don't think he really gave serious consideration.
Maybe he should hire a search firm. Maybe that's what he should do.
Well, the thing is, and the other part about this firing is that it really felt like, you guys mentioned how Devontae Adams felt after the Monday game. It felt like the team was ready to mutiny if something didn't happen. I mean, Josh Jacobs was out there saying, I don't get paid to make the coaching decisions, when he was asked how you fix the offense. And it just feels like all of this piled up. And why does Ziegler get thrown in? I feel like that's because McDaniels and Ziegler decided, hey, we're going to turn this place into Patriots West. And if you see what's happening Patriots East right now, that place is burning down. Now Patriots West is burning down. You bring in Jimmy Garoppolo, Jacoby Myers, Brian Hoyer. I mean, you have all of these former Patriots on the team who probably are thinking, well, we're not going to be here next year because our two guys just left. So it's just been a total disaster. And we didn't even talk about the fact that Ziegler gave Derek Carr an extension, and then boom, you get rid of him. Darren Waller an extension, boom, and then you trade him away. And the Chandler Jones thing was a huge signing when it happened. He played one good season, but that thing's been a nightmare for the organization.
He wasn't even good. He was bad. He played one full season and then things got weird. The draft picks, to your point, Breech, haven't been very good. I mean, Tyree Wilson, Michael Mayer, Byron Young, Trey Tucker, Jacoby Bennett, Aiden O'Connell this year. Now you're only 8 games in, but then last year you didn't have a first round pick or a second round pick. So it's Dylan Parham, Zamir White, Neil Farrell, and then you trade all these picks for Devontae Adams. There's just like there's a lot of personnel mismanagement. Look, Mark Davis well within his rights. Just surprised he did it in the middle of the second season. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we will talk about what it means to have Antonio Pierce as the interim head coach, and who else could be a candidate for the Raiders next.
Well, you need the sports news anywhere?
We've got breaking news to bring you.
Then get your sports anytime you want them. Big trade news overnight to discuss.
Because we know you need sports all the time.
A lot of movement in the rankings this week.
A legend adds to their legacy.
We're bringing you that breaking news right here on HQ.
CBS Sports HQ, anywhere, anytime, all the time.
All right, welcome back to the Pick Six podcast, emergency podcast. Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler fired by the Las Vegas Raiders. Man, I wonder if they hired Jeff Saturday next. What do you think about that?
I'm not going to know anything else. Mark Davis.
Mark Davis got a front row seat to what that looks like. So maybe that's the last thing in his mind. What's the thing that the hashtag that was trending, Breech, when they were yelling at the
Smarten up.
Smarten up.
That's what Mark Davis yelled to the Raiders fan when he said,
that's what I yell at my kids. Smarten up.
I was looking at this Paul Gutierrez article. He's like the beat writer for the Raiders for ESPN, and it's like, yeah, these up. I could see how an owner might get a little perturbed. We mentioned some of them, but it's like blowing the largest lead in franchise history and losing the Arizona Cardinals in week 2.
Oh, I forgot that one. That was a 20-0. Yep.
Up 20-0. Falling to the Colts, who Saturday's only win in 8 games last year. Squandering a double-digit lead to the Baker Mayfield, who joined the team 2 days prior, not 5 days prior, 2 days prior. Getting shut out in New Orleans in week 8 last season, where the starting offense failed across the 50-yard line, and then the losing to Tyson Bagent. So Antonio Pierce is taking over as the interim head coach. Very interesting, because he was sort of the leader, the coach on the defense, if you will, of a Giants team that won the Super Bowl, and his first game as interim head coach against the Giants. This is a massive leap up for Antonio Pierce.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at an interim job, it's like the I think it was the running backs coach that took over for Josh McDaniels. I have to double check, but in Denver. And I mean, he's still like an assistant around the league somewhere, but I don't think this is anything other than giving Mark Davis time to pick the next wrong candidate. Again, hire a search firm, Mark Davis, to be my advice to you, but I think it's an opportunity for Antonio Pierce to go out there and bring this team together. Maybe he can be like the locker room guy that they need, but at the end of the day, this team is so dysfunctional that I don't know if, bringing Bernie Lomax as Vince Lombardi for Halloween out there is going to help them figure things out.
Well, and I'll say one thing, because Brinson just said this is a massive move up for Antonio Pierce, and that might be an understatement. This guy was literally coaching high school football 6 years ago, which is better than Jeff Saturday, who had been coaching it the prior week before he got hired. And then after that, he was at Arizona State for 4 years before getting his first NFL assistant coaching job last season with the Raiders. So he has literally been an NFL assistant coach for less than 1.5 seasons before now being the interim coach. But I will say Mark Davis better pay close attention to what's happening with Antonio Pierce, because if he goes off on a run and this team does well, hey, maybe hire that and give him the full-time job, which you did not do with Rich Bisaccia after he cleaned up that whole mess, led the team to the playoffs, and you still didn't hire him. So I think this is a great auditioning chance for Antonio Pierce, and I think Davis will actually take these results seriously if the Raiders somehow do well.
Why do you say that?
Because of it blew up in his face with
Yeah.
Bisaccia. I think he's at least regrets that a little bit. And if Pierce goes,
I was going to say, does he regret making? Well, does he regret
like
making
an empty bit? He doesn't seem like a guy who has a lot of regret in life. I mean, he eats.
I think he definitely regrets not hiring Rich Bisaccia and hiring Josh McDaniels instead. Like I think.
Well, what about?
I think clearly he regrets
further
that.
Before that. I mean, he made Jack Del Rio give the press conference announcing essentially that I'm going to be fired for John Gruden, and Brinson just read the records. He took that team to 12 wins one year. Like Jack Del Rio wasn't the problem. It's just that John Gruden became available. And I think the question is this: like, if you get a phone call from Mark Davis and you're a coach, it may not be in your best interest to answer it, because it means some very bad things are going to be in your future football related.
Jim Harbaugh.
Well, things are already bad in his future. So his present, I don't think it get worse in his future.
Well, I'm saying like Jim Harbaugh, he might be like, you know what? I don't feel like dealing with this at Michigan. He gets his team back to the playoffs again this year, or close. Back to the playoffs seems pretty likely. We don't have to get into the machinations of all the Ohio State versus Michigan stuff and how that plays out in the playoff stuff, but both can make it, obviously. And if he gets back to the playoffs, even if you fall short of a title, no one's going to begrudge you for taking Michigan to 3 straight playoffs and like having the best run, beating Ohio State a bunch, and then saying, I don't want to deal with the NCAA because they won't let me advance scout. I'm leaving. And you take the job in Las Vegas. I think both the Chargers job, if it opens up, and the Raiders job would be interesting for Harbaugh. Just because
and that's the flip side of Mark Davis, where he says, I don't want Rich Bisaccia, is that the guy loves to make a splash hire. We saw it with Gruden. We saw it with Josh McDaniels. And if he wants Jim Harbaugh, he'll go out and do it. And the thing about Harbaugh, though, is that, remember, if they do get punished, and just the way all that evidence points seems like
you think he's guilty?
He could have a punishment coming his way. And, NFL media had reported last week that if Harbaugh gets hit with an NCAA suspension, he's likely going to have to serve it in the NFL. So if he's suspended, say, 8 games, he's going to have to sit out the first 8 games of his tenure with the Raiders.
Is that true?
That's what NFL media reported. I'll take the right arm of the league. I'll trust him.
That is
what
wild.
About this, though? What about the concern that Jim Harbaugh isn't known to stay in a place very long? So now you get him in LA, Vegas, wherever they are, and they have some success, and then he's going to be out the door going to San Diego State or whatever, 3 or 4 years down the road.
I don't think that is a big deal in Las Vegas, because what happened in San Francisco, I had a front row seat to that living there, was that Harbaugh is butting heads with the front office, with the general manager, and you have an owner in Jed York who was mostly siding with the general manager, so Harbaugh couldn't get what he wants. Well, guess what? In Vegas, Harbaugh will have a direct line to Mark Davis. They'll probably be best buddies, so that's not going to be an issue. So I think that if there is one place where Harbaugh would work, it's going to be where he has a direct relationship with the owner, and not that he would go to Dallas, but a situation like a Jerry Jones, a Mark Davis, where you have an owner who has no problem with a vocal head coach like that.
Well, Gruden wasn't going to go anywhere either until those emails leaked out from the Washington Post that published them.
Right.
And like Harbaugh, remember, the Jaguars drafted Trayvon Walker over Aiden Hutchinson basically because Trip Baalke and Jim Harbaugh hate each other, and Aiden Hutchinson has tiny little dino arms. But yeah, I think he's a name that always is going to get thrown out and would make sense, and he'll at the very least he'll use the opportunity for leverage. Do you think that because of Mark Davis's sort of general frugal behavior, I assume now he's like off the hook on paying Gruden any money, that he would be more likely to sort of not make a splashy hire, knowing that Josh McDaniels, he's going to be paying Josh McDaniels for the next 4 years.
I don't know if he's frugal. He paid John Gruden a lot of money. I don't know what Josh McDaniels' contract was, but I would imagine it's probably top 15-ish. Either way, I think the bigger issue for me, and Breech sort of touched on this, I don't think you need a splash hire. I think you need to figure out what works best for making your organization better. And that, to me, step one is taking yourself out of the hiring process and then going to find someone, because the league is littered with guys who aren't quote unquote splash hires. Mike McDaniel isn't a splash hire, but it turns out he's pretty good at his job. Brandon Staley year 1, but I can't sort of stand on that anymore. But there are guys around the league where you can point to. And I don't know if Dan Campbell was a splash hire. He didn't come from a ton of success when he was in Miami. I think that's the route you want to go down. I think we've worn out the path of, oh, this guy was great in 1994. Let's see what he can do now. I think you find like a Ben Johnson's a guy whose name comes up a lot, the offensive coordinator in Detroit. And again, two other names that I should have thought of earlier. Shane Steichen's doing well. Jonathan Gannon is doing a lot with very little in Arizona. And that's actually Breech, a defensive side of the ball guy. I know we're in a pro offensive hiring cycle, but I think any defensive guys that you might be interested in?
Lou Anarumo?
Brinson, I was trying to make you not say it.
Yeah, I know you were. Because I think Lou, look, I mean, I don't know if people are like, don't want to hire Vikings defensive coordinators. Like Mike Zimmer had to be there for like 25 years before he got a job. Lou Anarumo's been
Bengals defensive coordinators.
Yeah. He's
what did I say?
He was Vikings.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Obviously,
you got your Zimmer Vikings brain line.
Yeah, obviously meant Bengals, but I mean, like Blue Anarumo I would take a hard look at him. Ben Johnson, who Wilson mentioned, I think you need to take a look at. I think Rich Bisaccia is going to get a peak too, and maybe Mark Davis has to say like, I'm sorry, I didn't give you the job, blah 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 blah. But I mean, I think all of those guys will get a look, and then wouldn't be shocked at all if they try to go peek at the Kyle Shanahan coaching tree and just see who's sitting around under the desk, and you might want to, or sitting around by the desk, you might want to grab from the Kyle Shanahan tree, or somebody that Mike McDaniel brought over. I mean, maybe the Bobby Slowick, first year obviously with Texans as the offensive coordinator, but somebody from that tree that could make a lot of sense. Any other?
Well, kind of on that thought process, Brinson, somebody that Mike McDaniel brought over. How about Mike McDaniel's offensive coordinator, Frank Smith?
Where do you go to college?
Who went to Miami of Ohio. He would be a great hire. We know how Miami of Ohio guys do in the NFL with Sean McVay, Super Bowl champion Sean McVay, and Super Bowl champion John Harbaugh, both former Miami grads. Great track record.
Cradle of coaches.
Cradle of coaches. So that would be an interesting name. And then you had Wilson mention the defensive side of the ball. Dan Quinn, I think, people always sniffing around him, and that might be something he might be interested in. And maybe this is the job where Eric Bieniemy finally gets hired. I think that he has. It's not his fault that Sam Howell is getting crushed, and it's
not his fault. I mean,
it's not. I mean, the offense works.
What's his title again?
The offense kind of works. Well, I mean, if Sam Howell's holding onto the ball forever,
he's certainly coordinating some of it.
It is true.
He's coordinating a little bit.
I would not pin all of the blame on Bieniemy for Sam Howell taking an insane amount of sacks. And real quick on the coaching payout, Mark Davis and the Raiders reached a settlement with Gruden in October 2021. So he's not paying Gruden anymore, even though that was a 10-year contract. And then ESPN says Josh McDaniels had a 6-year contract. So he's got 4.5 years of paying Josh McDaniels on top of whatever this new coaching staff is going to cost. So maybe going cheap, getting a Frank Smith or a Ben Johnson, somebody who's never been a head coach, is going to be a lot less than hiring somebody like Jim Harbaugh.
Yes, will be a lot cheaper to go that route. All right. That'll do it for us. The Josh McDaniels Fired Emergency Podcast. John Breech, Ryan Wilson, Will Brinson. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We're back later this afternoon with a Brady Quinn and Leger Duzable podcast. I'm sure we will talk more about Josh McDaniels and the Raiders. Thursday show, of course, the Pick Show. And then these three knuckleheads will be back in your feed on Sunday night following the Week 9 games. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. For Breech, for Wilson, I'm Brinson. See you guys.